Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Abilene People, our podcast here on bigcountryhomepage.com, where we talk to Abilene's most interesting PhDs in political science and professors of political science, and that has to mean Paul Fabrizio. How are you, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing fine, Danny. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm not sure I'm the most interesting PhD in political science.
I think
there's some good ones here in this town.
The only other one I know is Neil Coates, and you're a lot more interesting than Neil.
Oh, no. Neil is cool.
This is the second time, only a PhD in political science would say Neil Coates is cool, but that's okay. I've known Neil for a long time.
Neil Beck on this show.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
You've been on this show before.
I have. This is a delight to get invited a second time.
Well, I've been trying to get you back for a long time, and I kind of got thinking you were avoiding me, but
Not at all.
I think you're just a busy guy.
I teach classes. I got to do my classes. So. This is, unfortunately, it's secondary to my classes.
We've always said that about you. You've got class.
I've got class.
Recently, I was privileged to attend just this last week. Mm-hmm. A really nice event. It was the annual Boy Scouts Award dinner, and some wonderful Abilenians. Dick and Kay Spalding invited Suzanne and me to be at their table. Mm-hmm. We enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. But at a Boy Scout dinner, you talk a lot about the Boy Scouts and, the Boy Scout ethos, the values, the Boy Scout motto, all of that.
Right.
Of course, the motto, I guess, is be prepared, but the values of the Boy Scouts are like trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, kind, courteous, these kind of things. Mm-hmm. The speaker was a Eagle Scout who also happened to be multiple times elected governor of the state of Texas, Rick Perry.
Yep. Yeah.
And Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry.
Yeah. Right.
And
really cool.
Oh, it was really nice. Every politician, former and present local, was there. I mean, the mayor sat right over here. Mr. Espinoza, a councilman recently elected, was sitting by the mayor. I mean, there was Stan Lambert, our state representative, former councilwoman Donna Albus, running for Stan's spot next year, Jay Hardaway, and there were others.
Former student of mine, yeah.
There were others. And I just was sitting there listening to all of this, thinking about the Boy Scouts and all the values and characteristics described. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I want to ask Paul Fabrizio, what's the disconnect? Because politicians love to talk about these things, but who among us would describe the current political climate in America as trustworthiness, loyalty, helpfulness, friendliness, courteous, kind? What's the disconnect between what politicians say and what politicians do? Dr. Fabrizio, welcome to the podcast.
I mean, you could ask that question of anybody, I would argue, in any field. I mean, we all have values, beliefs that we say we uphold, but when you look at our lives, do we really uphold them? If we did, we wouldn't have a need for church in some way. We wouldn't have a need for, for Catholics, the sacrament of confession. For other people, wouldn't have a need for counseling that they go to. There's, there is always, I believe, this idea that there is a greater thing that we can be. And there's this idea that I think we all have that if only we could behave in a certain way, things would be really good. But politics, unfortunately, is public. And because it's public, its mistakes, its flaws, its practitioners are known. So when you're a politician and you make a mistake, let's say you get arrested for drunk driving, for example, everybody's going to know. It's going to be on social media. It's going to be in the news media. So people are going to know. Where if you're in construction and you make a mistake, nobody's going to know. That's what I think it is. That's why I think this leads to that. but I'm not sure that politicians are that much different than anybody else.
Well, fair enough. And having kind of preempted the rest of the conversation, that's all we have.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Podcast today. Yeah, but having stipulated that all God's children's got personalities and all God's children's got issues and sin. Why do you suppose, however, that politicians love to talk about these kind of things, even in a room full of people that maybe they might, knives come out when the politics are at stake? Not that was the case the other evening.
Right. No.
You know what I'm saying?
I mean, and what was said at that and the vision that is laid out by the Boy Scouts. I wasn't a Boy Scout, but my son was a Cub Scout for a while. I think that speaks to our better nature. It speaks to our desire. It speaks, if you go back to the ancient Greeks and they talked about virtue, it speaks to the fact that there's this belief that we can do good things. We can be good people.
Almost like that's who we want to be.
Exactly. And politicians are a little different than other professions, or politics a little different, because it's public. So you talk about things that otherwise you would talk about privately. So that's where I think it becomes known, but it also, I think it forces politicians to be, what's the right way to say this? It forces politicians to be dishonest. Look at it this way. You're running for office and you know that you are a flawed person. And you want the voters to know that you're going to be honest with them. Do you tell the voters that you're a flawed person? Do you go into your weaknesses? No, that won't work. So in essence, just the very act of talking to the voters forces you into a little bit of exaggeration, a little bit of, dare I say it, lying, because otherwise you're not going to get elected.
Am I naive? Because I think the public would embrace somebody who says, hey, I'm a flawed person. I'm not perfect. Almost like use that as a political tool,
It depends. I think any politician who says, with the exception of Donald Trump, who does things differently, I'm going to put him in a separate category. But other politicians, they have said, I'm not perfect. I'm a flawed man. I'm a flawed woman. I make mistakes, A lot of women politicians talks about being moms and being, so many things and trying to do so many things. And that's a message that they're not perfect. But I believe there's a difference between saying that and going into detail about your weaknesses. Because the last thing you want to do if you're running for public office is let everybody know, oh, I have a weakness for alcohol, for example, or I like gambling. You don't want to tell that to anybody, and that could be used against you. So even if you're demonstrating vulnerability, you have to be very careful. Otherwise, that vulnerability could be used against you. And so you're in a difficult position. Politicians have a really tough job trying to sell themselves, but sell a version of themselves.
So how do you address this to young people in class? Do you teach these kind of issues? Do you talk about, for example, moral courage as a political virtue, or do you just lay it out as you have in this conversation here? Hey, look, there's two tracks. One is the ideal and one is reality. And in politics, man, you got to pump up the ideal, because in the reality world, knives will come out. Again, that's the second time I've used that phrase. I don't use that phrase.
We're just getting started.
Yeah. I don't know. How do you teach young people the art of politics or the science of politics relative to moral behavior and moral dilemmas?
The first thing I do is I have the students study specific politicians. How do they do their job? So what is their background? What led them to politics? And then what do they do now? What do they say now? What do we know about them? And then they are to observe them for a period of time. And then what I have, like I'm teaching a Congress class now, the students actually set out to follow what that congressperson would do. So in my Congress class right now, we're simulating the U.S. Senate. And I have the students representing actual U.S. senators doing what the senators would do, acting, if you will, as the senators would act. So I'm not telling them so much as they are learning by watching actual people do it.
How does that work? Do they enjoy that? And are you impressed, or do you find yourself thinking, oh, boy, they left a lot on the table?
They always leave a lot on the table, but that's to be expected. You can only do so much in terms of imitating people and within the constraints of a class period. But I'm impressed when they really get into the character of people. And when I see those students struggle just as I see the politicians struggle. So there's one student right now who's representing Senator John Thune, the majority leader in the Senate, Republican, South Dakota, a man who portrays a certain image of rectitude, okay?
Boy Scout.
Yeah, you're right. And how does he accomplish what he needs to do to get the government open? And the struggles that he goes through trying to keep his people together as well as reach out to the other side is really, really difficult. And so the students see the moral dilemmas that he has to do. So the student who's doing it has become very quiet, just like John Thune is very quiet. And the student who's playing Chuck Schumer is just the opposite, much louder, much more aggressive, because they have a smaller coalition to work with. They're already in the minority, and they are in the position to make all these demands. So it's fascinating how the students start to adopt or adapt some of the attitudes of the people they're playing. Now, the whole thing is it a good idea to study these people in this way? I think as a way to understand politicians, it's a great way, but it's not going after that virtue at all.
Yeah, it's just these
are real people.
Real people in these positions in real time. Let's take a look at them. Fair enough. So you mentioned the government, getting the government open. We are now entering day 30-something, but we're in the middle of the longest government shutdown as we sit here recording this podcast. How about the politics of that? I'm sure your students have a lot to say about it, not even just role-playing. But
They, like anybody else, are just amazed in a bad way that this is happening. How can the government shut down and not do anything? And then the other part is, I think we're all waiting, because I'm training them about politics. So what are the pressure points that could come up that could cause the government to open up again? And what would it take to do that? And November 1st was a big day, when the food stamps would become an issue, the SNAP program. Earlier than that, there was paydays for members of the military, for example. Now everybody's watching airports, as the TSA and more importantly, the air traffic controllers. If they don't show up and if we close enough flights, will that be enough to get the politicians to say, yeah, we've got to do something? There's real damage. So it's fascinating and it's horrifying for the students to watch this government do it. And what is the lesson we're sending to, the future leaders of this country, that it's okay for the government to shut down for a month?
And does anybody care? Does anybody really care about that idea that you just presented? Well, what lesson are we sending to our future leaders? Does anybody in real time care about that? But by real time, I mean today.
Yeah.
I think the kids care.
I think the kids care. And that, to me, gives me hope. I care as a professor because, again, part of me wants to present the ideal. Government shouldn't be shut down. I think all the politicians, except for a few, want the government to be working. But the fact that it can't right now, I think speaks to deeper underlying issues that are there. And, I don't know if you're going to like this, but I think it's the American people who are having those issues, those conflicts, and the politicians are just reflecting it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I don't know that I like it, but I think it's a fair assessment of where America is. America is divided.
Yeah.
And we have sides, but in the middle we have a bunch of apathy, and I don't know how to even really talk about that in any way that's not just more and more frustrating. Because what can we do about it? Because you and I aren't apathetic. I mean, you teach it. I work for a media company, which brings to mind another line of questions I'd love to talk about, and that's media. Great, but it's also just about the First Amendment and kind of where we are in America. So I don't know, 6 weeks ago now. Jimmy Kimmel was pulled off air, right, and then Jimmy Kimmel was put back on air. I don't know if you even watch much Jimmy Kimmel or
I have, but not recently. But I've read a lot about it. Since he came back on air, the little bit that I've seen, he has really, really blistered the president. I mean, it's gotten more intense, not less. So I think that we are hard pressed to say we're having a First Amendment crisis. Yet I thought there for a while 6 weeks ago we might be having a crisis of the First Amendment. We're cracking down on free speech. Somebody in America ought to be able to criticize the president, ought to be able to blister the president, and the late night comedians are doing that. I don't know too many more people, maybe podcasters, not in this room, but podcasters are doing that maybe. But that's a part of who we are. It's a part of our Constitution, certainly the Bill of Rights. I guess there's a question in here somewhere. I'd like to know what Dr. Paul Fabrizio thinks about First Amendment rights in America today. I love freedom of speech. To me, the First Amendment, freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and the right to get a redress of grievance, the right to complain, I think is basic to who we are as Americans. And the Jimmy Kimmel thing bothered me in only one way, and that was when the head of the Federal Communications Commission made comments about Jimmy Kimmel and ABC. And he implied with those comments that Jimmy Kimmel was incorrect. There must be some action. Maybe we need to take him off the air. The First Amendment is about government. It only involves the government and the government messing with people's right to talk. When the head of the Federal Communication Commission makes comments about someone, that to me is a violation of the First Amendment. Now, ABC can do what they want with Jimmy Kimmel because he's an employee of ABC. 100%. They can fire him all they want. They can censor his speech. They can do that. They have that right. And I have no problem with that. It's like, do you need to do that? Whatever. But they can do it. They can take him off the air and all that. But as soon as the government gets involved, that's where it's really troubling. And it's very troubling. This administration also has gone after people who are not citizens in college campuses who have been critical of the administration or of Israel. Again, it's government interfering in speech, and government under the First Amendment can't do that. And the First Amendment, you read the words, it doesn't say it's limited to citizens. Because it doesn't say it's limited to citizens, it's for everybody who's here. So we have to give the same rights to someone who's not a citizen, to someone who's here illegally, as we do to any of us who are citizens.
And that's certainly the nature of due process.
Yeah.
That you have a right to adjudication in a court.
Right.
You have a right in front of a magistrate. You have a right for your case to be heard.
Right.
For summary judgment is passed.
Right. The 4th, 5th, 6th Eighth Amendment
all of these
deal
amendments,
with this, and they apply to anybody.
They apply to anybody. If you're on our soil, you have that right. You can't just indiscriminately, go into a parking lot and assume that these people should be taken without the due process afforded them in the Constitution. And yet we've seen that.
Yeah, unfortunately.
We've seen that. It's unfortunate. And so I was talking with somebody very close with me, and they made the point, well, yeah, and unfortunately, that's going to happen until we get a lot of illegals out of our country. Now, well, actually, what ought to be happening as we seek to get illegals out of our country is affording everybody their due process right, and then work the process and get the illegals out of our country.
Yeah, exactly.
Where am I wrong?
Yeah. I mean, the Constitution sets up processes. That's what it's about. And it's in response to a time when there was no processes. This is our response to the tyranny of the British monarchy. And so what we did is we created things that need to be done. You follow the process, then you can do things. You can kick people out of the country. You can throw them in jail. All that. Just follow the steps. You don't need to do those other things. Okay? That to me is what the Constitution's about. It lays out ways to do things. So let's follow them.
So I'd like to ask you a hypothetical.
Yeah.
How would you react if some of what we see going on in our country was happening here locally? Mm-hmm. Would you feel you're free to talk about it as a professor?
Yes.
And would you feel that your students should protest if they choose to?
Yeah, of course. First Amendment. If they want to take the opposite side, First Amendment, go right ahead. I mean, you look at the history of the American Revolution, it was a reaction to a denial of basic human rights. Our framers of the Constitution, the founders of this country, said that we are people because God has given us certain rights. So let's act on those rights. And none of these rights are absolute. There's limits on everything. But those rights are something that we should take a hold of and hold. So when there's a protest, whichever way it is, go and participate, please. I think that's your responsibility as an American citizen. Or even if you're here in the United States, if you feel that way, if you feel strongly. And if you don't feel strongly, don't participate. And so
if someone is watching this podcast and they're thinking, man, that makes a lot of sense to me. I really like this Paul Fabrizio guy. But I also have questions about ICE and about, somebody being grabbed and pushed into a van. They kind of bumped up against that when they were talking about due process. But I'm concerned about that. I wonder what Dr. Paul Fabrizio says about that. So this hypothetical person, maybe not so hypothetical, maybe it's me. I wonder what Dr. Paul thinks. What do you think about all that?
I think that we have to follow the rules, the policies and procedures laid out by the Constitution and subsequent laws. There is a way to arrest people. There's a way to detain people. We see it all the time. The Abilene Police Department follows that way. You go to California, they follow that way. You go to Alabama, they follow that way. Why is ICE doing it differently? And that is what is very troubling, is that there seems to be a different standard for them without any laws written that allows them to do that. And the Supreme Court, through some of its, what we call the shadow docket, some of these emergency appeals that they've had, seems to be letting them do that without going through its regular process. And so that is troubling. I mean, I have no problem with arresting people who are here illegally. I have no problem with arresting people if they're at a protest and they go too far. Okay, that's okay. We can deal with that. There's laws and there's ways to handle it. Do you need to cover your face up and not have any identification on your body as to who you are? No, you don't need to do that. you're doing it because you're trying to send a message. You're trying to send a message, and is that message really constitutional? You're trying to create fear. And is that really a constitutional message? Do we want the government sitting there trying to create fear in its citizens? And I don't think so. Because right now it's happening for the most part with people who are not citizens. But as we've seen in other countries, that could be turned and used against citizens now.
Well,
and it already has in some cases.
I was going to say, I think it has, and that's concerning to anybody who understands not just jurisprudence in America, but understands the values of America. And not that those two are necessarily at enmity with one another, jurisprudence and values. But what I'm saying is it's not just legal, it's ethical. It's what's right.
Right.
And I saw, let me get at it this way. My wife and I have a friend who left the country out of fear that she would be deported. And so in talking with our friend, she said, well, yeah, I've let my papers lapse. Well, that's unfortunate. And that's a bad thing.
That's a bad thing. You've got to follow the rules.
She's got to follow the rules.
You got to follow the. I'm sorry, but you got to follow the rules.
But here's the punch in the gut.
Okay.
She has a 5-year-old boy who's a U.S. citizen.
What do we do? Yeah.
And her fear was, if I'm deported, what will become of my boy? And that is really a very difficult thing to contemplate.
Right.
And I'd like to know what she left. She took her boy with her.
Yeah.
She went back to Central America.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to somebody who faces this dilemma?
I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to give any legal advice. She probably did the smart thing from a political perspective, but she also did the unfortunate thing from the political perspective, because what that says by doing that is it's devaluing American citizenship. I would like to think that being an American citizen means something. That's why people come here. They want the opportunity to maybe go through and become a citizen. My mother was an immigrant. My dad's parents are immigrants. They all went through the processes. My dad's parents went through Ellis Island outside of New York. But you do that with the idea that American citizenship means something. So in this case, we had a situation where you are weighing possible deportation versus American citizenship with the greater good of trying to keep a family together. And they made a decision to leave. Another decision in terms of valuing American citizenship is that they stay because the child is an American citizen and needs a family, needs a parent around him. So, there's two ways to look at it, which is most important. And I think by doing that, that's a devaluation of American citizenship. And that just bothers me. And I realize the consequences that you could have people who are here illegally. Okay? Yes. But does American citizenship mean something?
Well, Boston has, my understanding, I'm not from Massachusetts, but my understanding is Boston has a tremendous population of illegals living in Boston.
Okay.
They're not brown.
They're Irish or something like that, or something. Yeah. Okay.
And they're not afraid of being deported.
Okay, that raises a whole nother question.
And that's the question I want to talk to you about.
Yeah, and that's troubling. The 14th Amendment says that there's equal protection under the law. That means we get treated equally regardless of our skin color.
And
if it's not, why is that?
We're really at a point in the conversation that I want to guard my emotions, because it makes me a strange cocktail of angry and sad.
Yeah.
And the sadness can become really depressed because our friend who left, she left because she and her son are brown. If they were white, Irish people, she would not have left. That's my judgment. That's my opinion. And of all of the rights that I'm concerned about, freedom of speech, due process, First Amendment, I guess what's that, the Fifth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and equal protection is a real concern. And you obviously have spent some time thinking about that as well.
Yeah, it's very troubling. If you look at the history of the United States, what you see has been a gradual, slow evolution to a state where we try to treat most people equally. It's been a long, long struggle. The struggle to get freedom of speech rights, the struggle to get freedom of press has been a long, long struggle. I think we've reached a place where we were pretty good at it. There were issues all over the place, but still, overall, compared to what it was in the 1920s, we have made so much progress since the 1950s.
Compared to the rest of the world.
And compared to, the rest of the world. We have done something that's really amazing. And then recently, it seems like we're going back.
And the going back is happening faster than the going forward could have.
Right. Going forward was a torturous struggle of civil rights movements, of legislation, of courts challenges. I mean, and you can argue that that is part of American history, is that we're always struggling with this. I tell my students that equality, the concept of equality, has caused more trouble than anything else in the United States. First, we struggled with black and white, slave, non-slave. Then, with the 14th Amendment, 15th, 13th, we got closer to the idea that, hey, blacks and whites are equal. Then we struggled over women. Then we struggled over people who are gay, the LGBT community. And now, we're having a big struggle over the transgender community. All of that is just part of a long line of struggling. And so it seems like we've recently taken some steps back. Now, you look at American history, there's always been 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 4 steps forward, 2 steps back. That's always been part of it. But how quickly this has happened has been a surprise.
Well, and we're having this conversation the week that we had federal elections and elections across this nation. And
actually, no federal elections.
Well, you're right. I'm so sorry. I misspoke. It's not federal.
It's been state elections. There's been a couple of Congress people, but other than that.
Very poorly worded. Elections across the nation that were state and local elections.
Yeah.
One of those was in New York City for mayor, and the gentleman who was elected is a Muslim. And I have thought that I had hoped that the concerns about this gentleman would be ideological in nature.
Yeah, he's a socialist.
He's a socialist.
Yeah.
He's a socialist.
Yeah.
But after the election, we're seeing anecdotal evidence. I'll characterize it as anecdotal evidence that some of the concern is that he's Muslim. And I saw one very popular podcaster this last 24 hours or so raising the question publicly, how could it be that New York City, a city that was devastated by attacks, that were perpetrated by Islamists, has now elected a Muslim?
Right.
And it seems to me that the answer to that question is, he would have been about 10 when 9/11 occurred in 2001.
He's 34, so he would be,
And he had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And it's possible, isn't it, that a Muslim could be a really good politician and a really good policymaker. Possible. It seems to me it's possible.
And it's possible that you could have someone who meets the moment, who is the right person at the right moment for the voters in that certain area. And
now, I'm Christian.
me too.
You're a Christian,
Yeah.
and I will freely admit that there are some really lousy Christian policymakers and politicians. Would you agree?
Yeah.
I just don't know that one religion is necessarily better than the other at making policy. And I think what I just said, a lot of people are going to really react to, because we are a Christian nation. So how do you balance all of that, Dr. Paul? You're a professor at a Christian university.
Yeah.
You're a self-professed Christian. You're a PhD in politics. Tell me, am I crazy?
It goes back to your first question at the beginning. First of all, I question whether I would call us a Christian nation. I think Christian values have embedded themselves in us. But if you look at some of the framers of the Constitution, they weren't very Christian in their beliefs. Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin really jump out. I mean, Thomas Jefferson chopped up the Bible, published his own version of the New Testament that took out all of the miracles that Jesus said. I mean, who does that? Okay, a Christian does that? I don't think so. They were deists, some of them. They believed in a God. So, now I forgot what the question was. I got carried away with that, and I apologize.
No, I think it's good. I like it. I'm wondering, was I aware of that? The chopping up the Bible bit? I guess I was, but it just somewhere, it wasn't at the front of my brain. Well, we're talking about the New York mayor and the conflict and thought that people might be having about a Muslim being mayor of America's largest city. You know, those are the persons saying, but we're a Christian nation.
Right.
What do we say about all that?
Yeah, and first I question, I'm not sure our founders would have thought of us as a Christian nation. Certainly there was a couple like John Adams who talked about it, but others who didn't, who deliberately didn't.
Quickly, but I would just want to stipulate, the people concerned about Mandami being a Muslim and being mayor of New York, they undoubtedly consider us as a Christian nation.
Yeah, and I would say there's Christian values, Judeo-Christian values that really made us, but I would challenge that are we a Christian nation? But then secondly, you look at behavior. I mean, Christianity has this fantastic set of values, beliefs, statements. I think about the Sermon on the Mount.
Beautiful.
You know, blessed are the poor, that sort of thing. And do our public policies meet that? Do they meet that standard that Christianity upholds? And I don't think so. If I were to make a judgment on that, I don't think so. We really don't like the poor, and we discriminate against the poor. We make it hard for the poor to get social services. We make it hard for the poor to get medical care. So are we really a Christian nation? That's how I come down on that thing. And then, you know, you look at history. I love history. And what you see is that Christian leaders have done really horrible things. Muslim leaders have too. I would argue it's a human condition, not necessarily religious. And what it is a bunch of people who can't live up to the ideals of their faith.
Yeah, because every strand of Christianity, just taking the Christian faith, for example, every single strand of it has people within that flavor who would say, I don't think Christians even ought to be involved in government. Yeah. And and advocates will say, well, we're a Christian nation. Well, there are a lot of Christians who would say Christians shouldn't even be involved.
Right. For all sorts of reasons.
For all sorts of reasons.
Absolutely. And then, you know, the same thing could take place in other countries that have Muslim leaders. You know, there's some who say, no, we shouldn't get involved in this. No, you know. And there's this concept that we haven't talked about, but that's when you have power corrupts. And you have someone who's good, goes into politics, and then what happens when they get in power? well, they get a little greedy, they get a little handsy, and they are abused by the system, become part of a bad system, however you want to put it.
Yeah, I wonder if this young man who is a Texas state office holder, James Tallarico.
Yeah.
I wonder, he's an ordained minister.
Yeah.
And now as he's entering, a much larger stage, how long can he maintain this really relatively pure ideology of we should be Christian people who are enacting policy on behalf of the poor and on behalf of the good of the nation? We'll see how long he can maintain that before he joins the mudslinging. If he does, he may not.
If he does, and he might be able to withstand it. We've had ministers involved in politics before. It's been tough for them, but the reality is it's tough for most people who go into politics.
One of the current senators in the state of Georgia, Raphael Warnock, is an ordained pastor, I believe. Right.
And I think there's someone else who's a minister, but I'm not positive on that. So, yeah.
Well, I think when Jesse Ventura was the governor of Minnesota, he was a wrestler, but that's not the same as being a pastor, right?
No, but everybody wrestles with their conscience when you go into politics. If they don't wrestle with their conscience, then those are the people who have gone off the deep end and you worry about.
So here we are. We're wrapping it up. We just had a wide-ranging conversation. I just want to say, as we look back over the last few minutes of conversation, is there anything you'd like to revisit or anything you think, well, I want to clarify something? Because sometimes it's helpful to do that. And I don't have anything specific in mind other than we started with the idea that the Boy Scouts, it was a lovely dinner we attended. The Boy Scouts have a certain ethos that they operate in, that they talk about. The idea of helping little old ladies across the street. Who would do that? Well, a Boy Scout would, right? Be prepared.
Exactly.
Trustworthiness and honor and virtue. And then there's politics.
It's dirty. It's corrupting. It's grubby. It's dominated by people with ambition. And, you hope for good things to come. But is that possible in a system like that? And I don't know. I always get excited when I watch politicians when they're first starting to run. I love to see new people when they're running because they're filled with idealism. And then over time, that idealism seems to disappear. And it's not that they become cynical, but I think they become realistic as to the limits of what they can accomplish. And so I enjoy that. Now, I have to tell you, I don't know if it's sharing a secret, but you sent me some questions before this interview.
Yeah.
And
it's a conversation.
Yeah, it's a conversation.
There's no secret at all. I'm happy to say this is the direction I like the conversation to go.
Yeah, and so one of the things that you put there is you asked who influenced me.
Well, that's exactly where I was headed.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly where I was headed.
And this is going to sound strange, but I was most influenced by Richard Nixon. And I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in Orange County. Richard Nixon lived there. In the summertime when I was growing up,
you hung out at San Clemente with the Nixons.
We did.
All know this.
We did.
No.
Yes. Well, it turns out in the summer, my church would go down and we would camp for a week at San Clemente State Park. And anybody who's
beautiful.
It is absolutely beautiful. And Richard Nixon's Western White House was right there. And his house went right down to the beach. So we would go every year and take a look at it. My dad once put his head over the fence, lifted his head and looked over the fence and was met by a Secret Service agent who told him he better back down. There was a Russian trawler that would be offshore. Richard Nixon was the politician who influenced me more than anybody else, and he was corrupt. A couple years ago, I was out in California at the Richard Nixon Library, and it's a great museum, and they have a fantastic explanation of all the dimensions of Watergate. And you would think that's a library, you know, they're going to be gentle to him. Actually, they were very rough on him on Watergate. And then a book came out by Garrett Graff, who's a historian. And he went through and went into even more detail about what Watergate entailed. Richard Nixon was a fantastic president and a corrupt president. And that dichotomy between the two sides of Richard Nixon has always fascinated me. So there's the ideal, and then there's the grubby reality. And that's what I try to get out of my students. That's what I want them to see. You know, you can have the ideals, and then how do you navigate in the grubby reality to get closer to those ideals?
Is that what you tell the next generation, the voters who are just starting to vote, just starting to think about, maybe some of them might even run for office?
Yeah.
Do you tell them to grapple with these things? How do you encourage them?
What I do in my classes is we simulate exercises, we simulate, you know, the government shutdown, that sort of thing. So you actually are confronted with the ideals. I mean, do the senators know that people are going without food? You better believe it. How do you handle that? And how do you handle negotiating with people who are interested in different perspectives? Like the Democrats are more interested in health care. So how do you get food for people when there's also this concern about health care? And how do you translate that into public policy and get enough people, 51 people in the Senate, to make it happen? And then it has to go back to the House. And how do you get them to do it when you're not even a member of the body?
Yeah, and if you wanted, for example, to make an amendment to the Constitution, then it's not 51.
It's two-thirds. It's two-thirds, 67 in both houses, and then you got to go to 3/4 of the states. I mean, it is really hard. What the framers did is they made it very, very difficult to get anything done. And that might make it more susceptible to the grubbiness of politics, the corrupting elements of politics. But how do you bring in the good, too, the potential for taking care of people, the potential for building up people, letting people enjoy the freedoms that God has given us?
This is not a question that I shared with you, but it's one that arises in my mind as we talk about how America is polarized, how difficult it would be to get a majority, much less a supermajority. Why and when, in your opinion, did America become so polarized?
I think America has always been polarized. I think it's just part and parcel of who we are from the very beginning. Go back to the Constitutional Convention that wrote the Constitution. There were the Federalists, and they wrote a book called the Federalist Papers that outlined the arguments for the Constitution. Well, there were the anti-Federalists who didn't like it, who disagreed with it from the very beginning. And then you go further. George Washington hated factionalism, as it was called. And at that time, there wasn't the development of parties. But as soon as he stepped away after his 2 terms, what popped out? Disagreements, party difficulties. I'm on this side. I'm on that side. I'm a Jeffersonian. I am an Adams guy.
Adams versus Jefferson.
Yeah, and Adams versus Jefferson, that election, 1800, is still the most disgusting election we've ever had in American history at the presidential level.
And the miracle that Lincoln brought us in abolition of slavery, that succeeded by 1 vote.
Yeah.
If memory serves me right.
It was.
And rushing closer to current times, the cultural divide that we saw in the 1960s, the Vietnam War, and the hippie generation, and then in the 70s, you mentioned Watergate, and the excesses of the 80s.
Greed is good.
Greed is good. Was it? I want to say Gecko, but I think that's not the right name.
Yeah, Michael Douglas's character.
Yeah, Michael Douglas's character, and then you have. The moral failures of Bill Clinton
Yeah.
Arguably the most gifted politician of our lifetime.
Possibly, yeah.
But then you have 9/11. Oh, you're right. America has been divided and polarized.
We've always been.
But boy, oh boy, today sure seems worse.
It does. But I grew up in the 1960s when it was a horrible time to grow up in terms of looking at politics. And there were riots. There were assassinations. We've been lucky we've had less violence today than they had in the 1960s. So, yes, there's polarization. But I think maybe because we have cell phones so people can take out their anger that way, I think so far we've had less violence.
I want to quickly say, because people watching the podcast will respond to that and say, well, wait a second, there's been one direct assault on Donald Trump's life, a shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania. There was a second where a guy was at the golf course with a high-powered rifle ready to go, and then the assassination of a social and political commentator, Charlie Kirk.
Right, and there were 2 people in Minnesota who got killed, too.
Thank you for bringing it up, absolutely, because it's easy to forget. Because they were state figures. I think it was an elected official woman and her husband killed.
And another one who was another couple, one of whom was elected, was also injured but not killed. The governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, his house was burned down.
Governor of Michigan and a kidnapped.
Yeah, I mean,
Nancy Pelosi's husband.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, we're coming up with quite a robust list.
But you go back to the 1960s.
Well,
and my Lord, the riots that took place,
and the national figures that were assassinated.
Yeah, you think about
JFK, RFK, MLK.
Yeah. And you think about Kent State, for example, with the National Guard shooting students.
And as bad as we have, and we talked about ICE, and as bad as we've seen, and as bad as protests that we've seen, we've not seen Kent State.
No, we have not. Yeah, exactly. And when the National Guard has been called out, they've been very, very disciplined, and they've had limited roles, and that is, in fact, a reaction to what took place in the 60s. We've learned, gradual evolution of where we're going in terms of how do we protect ourselves from the government and from each other.
And there's the landing pad right there. So where do we go from here? And are you the glasses half full or are you the glasses half empty?
Oh, I'm both.
I like that.
I hate to answer that way, but I mean, I could make an argument that we're heading down an authoritarian path. But I also see where the rule of law seems to be holding. The Trump administration is following judges' rules. It's pushing, but it's following judges' rules. I mean, look at the food stamp issue. And a judge in Rhode Island said you have to give food stamps. So the Trump administration is giving food stamps. They're giving 65% of people's allotment. The judge said, now you got to give 100%. Well, the Trump administration said, we're going to appeal to the next level of courts. Okay, that's following the rules. You're doing the process, you're doing the procedures that you're supposed to do.
In the meantime, do they have to give more than 65%?
They, by appealing, are asking a higher court whether they have to do it. But so far, you look at the Trump administration, and they're largely following judges' rules. They're following the rule of law for the most part. So that gives me hope. Scary because they're always pushing, but they're following the rule of law for the most part. In other words, I don't see a constitutional crisis where the whole system's going to come down. At one point I did, but I don't anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's a good sober way to look at some of the things that have concerned us, because things are different. But different in and of itself is not a bad thing. Yeah. And sometimes it's just the pains of the stretches of the elasticity of democracy, which I don't know if anybody's ever said that before, but I like the way that came out. We need to write that one down.
Yeah, we should. There's a columnist, a conservative columnist, David French.
Oh, I love David French,
who talks about a rubber band. So
Yeah.
You know,
I
think it's him.
I don't know David French, but he and his wife Nancy French have both written some really good things.
Yes.
And, they come from my tradition, my religious tradition in the Christian faith. So I've followed them a bit. So you're both. You're just the glass is a 50% contained water guy. That's who you are, right?
Yeah. Today I feel more optimistic than pessimistic as I look at what's going on. From a political perspective, what stands out to me from the election on Tuesday to today is that there seems to be some Republicans who are starting to realize that Donald Trump is only going to be president for a couple more years. So they're going, well, when President Trump is not on the ballot, Republicans don't do well. What does that say about his policy positions? So when he is no longer in the picture, how do I, as a politician, navigate so that I can still stay in power?
All of that is a politically expedient thought process and conversation, and it is inevitable.
It is inevitable.
There has never been a politician that's been around forever.
Exactly. And what President Trump is beginning to experience, and it will increase the longer he's in office, is the lame duck syndrome. You're no longer going to be president at some point, and politicians know that, and they're thinking about who's after you.
You may remember the first time you were here, I just asked you, is MAGA here to stay? And I don't know if you remember your answer. But I think you said something along the lines of, well, it's really, as long as Donald Trump is here, MAGA is here. And I think what you're saying now, it feeds into the same line of thought.
Yeah.
That it's really a personality. I don't know if it's driven solely by personality, but it is certainly a personality affected political movement.
I agree.
The personality of Donald Trump.
I agree.
And look, I don't think that it's wrong for anybody to have an opinion in favor of or against that dynamic, but it is real, that dynamic, the personality of Donald Trump. Anybody that argues otherwise isn't paying attention.
He has been the most dominant politician in our lifetime. I mean, that's a simple reality. He dominated politics. He dominated the White House, the agenda of both parties in a way that would make Richard Nixon or Lyndon Johnson jealous.
Absolutely. And isn't that interesting? The most dominant politician of our lifetime came to it appealing as a non-politician.
Right.
But this is where we end up, isn't it? That this idea of power, and all of a sudden we become the very thing that we don't want to become.
Be. Right. And, Donald Trump argues he wasn't a politician, but he was interested in politics and dabbled in it. In 2000, he looked at running for president. In 1980s, he was talking about, maybe I should be president. So, I think there was always that germ there that just developed, that kernel of truth in him that just developed. So, and again, when you're running for office, there's an innocence about what you say. I'm not a politician because I've never been elected. Okay, that's true.
Well, what a great conversation. What's the future hold for Dr. Paul?
Final exams start in 4 weeks, I think. So I got to get through that.
What about next semester?
You're trying to get at something. Yeah, next semester will be my last semester teaching. And then it'll be 30 years at McMurry University. And I've had a great career. And so I'm going to retire in May of 2026. So.
That's really stunning to hear. I heard a week or so ago that was an announcement you had made. Mm-hmm. I just suspect people are thinking, wait, what? Dr. Paul's gonna step aside? Yeah. So what are you gonna do? Watch a lot of Price is Right? That's one of our stations, by the way.
I don't know. There's family issues. That my wife has elderly parents and they live in Virginia, so we're going to be spending time helping take care of them. But this is our home, And so be involved. I'll certainly be happy to come on your show anytime you want me to.
I'm thinking,
we'll be, old men here arguing, grumpy old men,
I've got both grumpy and old down, so I qualify. I'm thinking of a Dr. Paul channel. You know what I'm saying? I'm thinking of a digital channel in the future streaming world where we have a Dr. Paul channel. I like that. I like that a lot. Paul Fabrizio, always a joy.
Thank you very much, Danny. You ask really good questions.
I remember when you had your radio show, The Two Professors.
Yes.
That was the name of it, The Two Professors.
It was The Professors.
The Professors.
Yeah, with Bill Libby and myself until he retired.
And that was always such an engaging show, and I had the privilege of being a guest on it once in a previous life. And I really think that you have a unique niche in the thought world of Abilene, the way Abilene approaches local politics and thinks about politics at large. I think you've been a tremendous influence, and I think you're much appreciated. And I think
thank you.
McMurry will be a little less without Dr. Paul. And I think that I'm glad to hear that you'll still be around Abilene and still plan on being a regular on the Dr. Paul show here on bigcountryhomepage.com, otherwise known as Abilene People, right?
Thank you very much, Danny. I really appreciate your inviting me onto this show. I really appreciate that.
Well, it's been a fun discussion. It's been wide-ranging. It's been a little bit all over the map, but that's what I wanted, and that's why you're Dr. Paul. A lot of fun.
This was sort of intense.
Yeah, it was good, but good.
Thank you.
So I want to give a big shout out to Travis Corrigan, our ace producer, TC, we call him, always taking care of business. And we appreciate you being with us here on Abilene People, a series of conversations with Abilene's most interesting people. And if Paul Fabrizio doesn't qualify, no one does, because it's been a very interesting conversation. I'm your host, Danny Sims. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time here on bigcountryhomepage.com and Abilene People.